The American actor Ray Romano once said that having children is like living in a frat house. Nobody sleeps, everything's broken, and there's a lot of throwing up. Welcome to this week's Mummafesto, the podcast where parenting and politics combine, with me, Stella Creasy, the MP for Walthamstow. My guest this week on the Mummafesto is the well-known parenting expert and childcare author, Sarah Ockwell-Smith. Sarah is considered to be the founder of what's called the gentle parenting movement. She's authored over 15 books on parenting that have sold 500,000 copies around the world, and her latest, How to Raise a Teen, will be out in July this year. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today on the Mummafesto. You are the person credited with starting what people now call gentle parenting, which I like to think of as basically trying to be like the parents in Bluey. Why don't we start a bit with you telling us a bit more about, well, frankly, what gentle parenting is and why it's such a powerful set of tools for parents?
I mean, I never set out to name it or to make a new style of parenting. It just happened organically. I've spent almost 2 decades working with parents, and it really was just a term that I used 15 years ago to advertise my sort of postnatal parenting classes, because I was focusing on sleep. And I didn't want people to think it was like the traditional sort of cry-based sleep training that I was teaching. So I called it a gentle sleep workshop. And then that spawned a gentle parenting workshop. And actually now I really wish that it hadn't sort of grown and expanded. So I've been plugging away and using a term by myself for a decade, and nobody else was using it, at least not in the UK. And then all of a sudden TikTok happened and it blew up. And now it's this whole thing, and people say, I'm the inventor of it, or I started it. And I think, honestly, people have been doing what I suggest for centuries, naturally. So if I'm asked in a nutshell to describe it, actually not too dissimilar to your description, I would say it's basically treating the children in the way that you wished all the adults treated you when you were a child. So it's about treating them with kindness and understanding and respect and equal rights as an adult. I wish the name didn't exist. I wish we could just call it parenting. I wish we didn't have to label parenting. But I think the most common parenting style around in Western society today is quite authoritarian still, very much focused on controlling children, shaming children, punishing children. And that's just not me. So one day we'll be able to just call it parenting. Until then, gentle, respectful, positive, authoritative, all words mean the same thing.
So just give us an example of the different approach that you mean, because obviously when you say authoritarian, I think for many people, when they do, before they become parents, they sort of promise themselves that they're not going to shout and they're not going to punish their children, and all the things that they felt perhaps that happened to them as kids they're never going to do. And then there's an inevitable moment when you hear yourself and you think, oh, I've become my mum, or I've become my dad. And I say that with love for my mum and dad, who were brilliant parents, but still all those best intentions that you have, and parenting, gentle parenting is trying to guide people in how to be the better version of themselves.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to say here, it's not about being perfect. I yell, my children are young adults now, and I still yell at them. I would like not to, but as the parenting expert, I still mess up regularly. The thing that defines the difference between gentle parenting and more authoritarian parenting, authoritarian is what a lot of people describe as, say, Victorian style parenting, or do as I say, not as I do. There's a lot of parents controlling children. There's children who must obey adults, and there's a lot of punishment if children don't do that. And in authoritarian parenting, we tend to have unrealistic expectations of what children are able to do. So, for instance, if you had a 3-year-old, you would go to a restaurant with them and get very angry if they didn't sit upright in their chair with their elbows off the table using their cutlery and didn't throw food around or scream. With gentle parenting, what would we do differently? To be honest, we probably wouldn't take a 3-year-old to a nice restaurant, because we know developmentally that's not a great match for them, and it's going to be hard for everybody, not least the child. They're going to be really bored. But if we do find ourselves in that situation, we think very much about the child's point of view. as well as everybody else. It's not about being permissive or rude and dismissive of other adults, but we would probably go armed with loads of colouring sheets and toys. Maybe, I'm not completely anti-screen time. Maybe they'd sit and watch our Bluey on your iPad for a little bit so everybody could get a bit of quiet. But if
there's going to be a Bluey backlash at some point, isn't there? There has to be.
No, I don't know.
We all want to live in the Bluey world where
I think maybe slightly unrealistic expectations of what parents are capable of doing. I think it would be really nice if there were episodes where they just basically lost it the whole time to show that they were real. But I think the absolutely key thing with gentle parenting, it's not about a set of phrases or if your child does this, then say this, or if your child does this, this is what you should do. As a lot of people think it is because of TikTok videos. It really is just approaching parenting with empathy for your children, really understanding what the children are capable of doing. So parents would have knowledge of a little bit of brain development, which is so important and actually so freeing as a parent. But for me, the absolute key is when you do mess up, when you do accidentally yell or take something away or punish them and you think, I have turned into my mum here, then it's what psychologists call rupture and repair. I call it holler and heal. So I'm a classic Essex girl and I do a lot of hollering and yelling. But it's when you mess up, when you get something wrong, when you think, gosh, I was really harsh unnecessarily, that was much more about me than my children. The key is we apologise. And in traditional sort of authoritarian old school parenting, we would never apologise to children if we messed up, if we yelled at them, if we punished them and then thought, it was a bit harsh. I can't tell you the difference it would have made to so many adults today if they had been apologised to by adults in their life who have messed up. So we put all this focus on the connection with the child and just saying to them, I was wrong. You shouldn't have done what you did. I'm not excusing that. I'm not being permissive. However, I was also wrong and I overreacted and I'm sorry. Of course, you can still go to the birthday party this afternoon. I shouldn't have overreacted like that. And there is so much power in adults really getting inside the mind of their children, whatever age. Actually, the book that I've just written at the moment is about teenagers, but it's about having that mutual respect. So many parents today believe that children should respect adults, but we don't respect children. And it's a mutual two-way street. When we demand or command respect from children, what we're actually getting from them is fear and compliance whilst they are scared. But then when they're not scared anymore, you don't have that fear and you don't have that so-called respect. And the key with gentle parenting is to just build on that respect from the moment of birth, which makes it a lot easier when they're older, I can tell you.
And so a lot of people listening to this will find that quite a powerful idea, but also quite challenging because you're right. We're often told, I've been shamed by parents of different generations, talking about having to negotiate with my children to get them to go into a buggy to get somewhere and them saying, I just put them in and move them. When you first started talking about this as an approach, what was the reaction that you got?
I mean, it's not when I first started about it. Any time I talk about it, particularly if I'm on the TV or a large radio station or a large newspaper, I will get really nasty emails. I will get all sorts of horrible social media comments. I'll get people submitting my form on my website, calling me all sorts of horrible names under the sun, telling me that I am the problem with all of the children today who are out of control. People like you are the reason there are so many stabbings. I can't tell you how many times I've had that particular email. People don't take to it kindly because it means that we have to really think about our own upbringings, and maybe if the adults in our lives weren't particularly gentle or kind or respectful towards us. And for me, a lot of gentle parenting isn't about necessarily what I'm doing with my children. It's about how I'm processing things in my head, about my own upbringing and my own childhood. And in turn, how my parents were raised. My parents were from the East End of London in a poor, very large East End family that basically survived on yelling and fear. And for me, when my children trigger me, I'm like, I've got that old East End fishwife that wants to yell coming out of them. So I really have a lot of empathy for people who did have authoritarian upbringings and the cognitive dissonance they feel that causes them to attack what I'm saying rather than to consider maybe what my parents said or did to me wasn't great. And actually, even worse, maybe what I said or did to my own children wasn't great. I think that's one of the hardest things as an adult, as a parent, is to think, gosh, maybe when I did that was advised with my baby or my toddler or my 3-year-old, maybe I did actually kind of hurt them or harm them or damage them in some way. And nobody wants to hear that as a parent, however old your children are. So it's much easier to attack the idea and call me a bleeding heart liberal or whatever. And, you know, the amount of times people call me a middle-aged Karen is particularly like in the Daily Mail readers. That's my favourite one. I'm going to get a T-shirt printed on it with it one day, I think. But it's not about blaming previous generations. I think it's about understanding what they went through and the challenges they faced, and realising I actually think we're fortunate that we have science on our side, that we can be the cycle breakers. And I also think it can help to improve the relationship with those who have come before you sometimes, if you can understand what they went through.
But you have also had a huge reaction from parents going, actually, this is something I want to do. This is a way of working, a way of building a relationship with my children that feels more positive and more constructive. Just tell us about some of the, I'm sorry to hear about the abuse you've had, often
I kind of got used to it. It's been going on. Yeah, exactly. I'm sure you're used to it as well.
That's when I think you should be allowed to use your fishwife voice.
Yeah.
That's when I think you should be allowed to go proper East End, proper Essex, and tell these people to do one. Because
but what is quite interesting, I think if we were men, we wouldn't get it so much. And historically, all of the parenting experts who have told us to parent through fear and control and coercion and obedience, they've all been men. They've all been male doctors who have had very little actual input with actual childcare. But if I was a 55, 60-year-old man saying these things, I don't think I would get the backlash that I do.
But you have also had a huge response from parents who have really connected. So just tell us a little bit about that.
I think it's that connection you say, but it feels right. I often say I'm a parenting unexpert, which sounds really silly. But what I mean is I kind of feel that I give parents permission to trust their instincts. It's like I'm telling parents what they already know, which makes it sound insane. But if I'm working with a new mum who wants to wear her baby in a sling during the day and sleep with her baby in bed with her, following safe bed sharing guidelines, I'll get an email from her saying, thank you so much. I can't tell you how good it made me feel that I could do what my instincts were screaming at me to do. And again, I love those emails, but I also find they're quite sad that we feel the need that we have to have an expert to tell us that it's okay to trust our instincts. But the positive comments, they all center around, you gave me the permission to do this. You gave me the permission to trust my instincts. You gave me the permission to take my child who was struggling out of school and try home education. You gave me the permission to really raise my teenager in a way that I wasn't raised. If you just listen to your heart, your instinct, and follow your child.
So obviously this podcast is about how parenting affects political perspectives, both in terms of being one, not being one, or the experiences that you had. And one of the debates recently that really chimes with what you're talking about is the debate about whether or not we should outlaw physical chastisement. I mean, basically being able to smack a child, which has been a long-term running discussion. What do you think gentle parenting has to offer public policy?
Oh my gosh, I could talk to you for hours. So how do I get this done in a nutshell? So I think the other important thing to say is that I also work for One Day a Week for Citizens Advice Bureau. I volunteer and have done for 5 years now. So I'm very in the trenches with the sort of the benefit system and the politics and food banks and so forth. And what I've really found is I think that gentle parenting, connection and forgiveness and those things we talk about really help in very stressful times, because we need to have the awareness of how the outside world is affecting us and how we process that affects our children. It's not easier, to be honest. All parenting is hard, however you do it. But I feel that when you're not adding to all of the stress and the shouting and the trauma and stuff that maybe is happening in the world in your own home, and your home is an oasis of calm most of the time, not all of the time, that's really helpful. However, this is where you would have me for hours. I do think also that we are limited in what we can achieve with the political system as it is. And in my book, Because I Said So, I talk lots about neoliberalism and how that's so damaging, particularly when you look at childcare and how that's funded, or indeed how the childcare changes are going to happen, how the benefit system is funded, and all of, not just funded, how it's set up. We are really unsupportive of young families, I feel, in our society at the moment. I think there needs to be massive changes and a huge investment and valuing in the early years, because we're literally building the future individual in the first 3 years. One of my children is a prison officer, and we often have conversations about the sort of the childhoods of prisoners and how you can almost predict with those sort of 4, 5, 6-year-olds where they're going to end up. And I think we have this opportunity, and we have the knowledge now, if we really drill down and focus and support in those early years and support the parents and the families, then in the long-term view, I think we will see dramatic change in society, from everything from education to crime to employment to mental health to physical health as well. But it's really hard being a gentle parent when our society is so against young children, mothers in particular, spending time with their children and just valuing of caring for children, nurturing children. I also think in the other way, I know you've mentioned this before, but how much politics would be if more mothers were involved with the skill set that they have and the vision and the nurturance. I feel that we need to move it much more over to much more women being involved and mums being involved, with a focus on parenting.
We probably have to have a moment in Parliament where we stopped everything to watch a couple of episodes of Bluey and just have a bit of a cry.
So much.
Obviously, if there were a lot more mums involved, because every mum I ever speak to who's watched Bluey has a favourite episode because of some moment about how they would like to be able to parent.
I feel that gentle parenting is amazing. It's world changing. I've devoted my life to it. But I have reached the point now, both in my work as an author, a gentle parenting expert, and with Citizens Advice, where I think there is only so far we can go, and now there has to be change at a political level. We have to change the education system. We have to change the child and adolescent mental health system. We've got to change the way we look after children with special educational needs. There's so much work that needs to be done that it's like that's a barrier in the way of how effective gentle parenting could be.
Sorry, but so the debate about whether or not a parent should be able to smack a child feels like one that comes into your discussion about gentle parenting, because it is very much about the parent's ability to control and chastise a child.
I just find it
What
insane.
Would you say to those people who say it's a step too far for the state to get involved in saying you shouldn't be able to do that?
I've been talking about this on various radio shows and so forth for about 5 years now, and I've reached the point of, I actually think it's mad that we're still talking about this. Who else am I allowed to hit? Could I come and punch you? Could I walk through my door and could I smack my husband because he's been annoying to me? Could I hit my dog? If I can't hit those people, and if somebody would be arrested if they hit me, how am I allowed to hit my children? I think it's not about being a nanny state and controlling what parents do. It's about just having equal rights and saying to children, you are worthy as much as I am as a fully grown adult. You're not an adult in training. You're not going to get those rights when you turn 18. You're deserving of those rights now. It's just, the other thing that really gets me about this as well is that if you're talking about hitting a child as a form of discipline, and I use the term hitting, right, when people would more commonly say smacking or popping or tapping, because all of those are hitting. It's just more palatable if we give it a nicer sounding word. But a lot of people will defend hitting children to say we need to teach them a lesson. To which I would say, well, can you not use your words to teach them a lesson? Could you not explain to them? And they'll say no, because they're too young, they don't understand. To which I would say, well, how do they understand the lesson from being hit then? If they don't have the brain development to understand ration and sort of hypothetical thinking or abstract thinking skills, how do they possibly understand why somebody who should ordinarily love and care for them has hit them and then abstract the lesson from that? If they don't understand the conversation in your teaching, they're not going to understand why you've hit them. It's insane. Do I think that people should be arrested and imprisoned for it? No, we would much rather go down the restorative justice path. I'd much rather see we have conversations with them about, why are you struggling? You know, what was the sort of the end of the tether? What's happening in your life that needs more support? Do you need some parenting classes or something? Do you actually need some help? Because a lot of the time when parents are hitting, it's because they don't know any better, and because they're so at the end of the tether with everything else that is happening to them, that's all they have left to give.
What do your family make of you having become this kind of almost public figure about parenting and about this different way of thinking of children?
My children think it is insane. I have had a time where I was having an argument with one of them, and they were just like, bring my book and show me my book. You say in this book, you say don't do this. Yeah, I mean, they're all older now. I think they're just embarrassed.
There must be both pride and frustration in that
yes,
moment.
I think they are proud of me. I think they were very confused when they were younger, particularly when their teacher would say, Ockwell-Smith, is your mum Sarah? I've got all her books. And they don't know how to respond to that. But now my eldest is nearly 22 and he's just coming to the end of a PGCE to be a secondary school teacher. So we're having lots of interesting conversations there. And I think he's sort of coming around to my way of thinking, despite the fact I don't think he really knows what I'd say because he's never read any of my books. But talking about behaviour and some of the, you know, detentions, isolations, exclusions. And he came home last week and said, do you know, Mum, I don't think they help. I don't understand why schools keep doing these things because it's always the same children in them again and again. Why are things not different? I much prefer how you say about trying to understand and support them and make them feel better. That works much better for me as a teacher. So I don't know. I think mostly they're embarrassed.
That's a good example of another. I mean, obviously, for people grasping with how on earth do you raise a child well, prior to gentle parenting, you know, the previous kind of big vogue was super nanny, and super nanny used to use time out, and it almost feels like these things go in waves. What is your response to people who would say, well, I don't hit my children, but I do put them in time out, and how does that fit with gentle parenting?
So I think it's really important to value what Jo Frost gave us. And I think a lot of people are surprised when I say that. She really did steer parents away from hitting children. And I don't think we can underestimate that. I think she's, in some ways, she probably wouldn't agree with me, but I think in some ways she started to sort of turn the lever towards more gentle parenting. For me, I don't like time out or the naughty step, because if a child has a problem, if they're behaving in a way because they're dysregulated, if you put them in time out on the naughty step, you're not teaching them a better way to behave. You're not helping them with those big things that they're going through. What you're saying is, I can't deal with you right now. I don't want you near me when you act like that. Sit over there, be quiet, think about it, and come back when you're better behaved. And when you've got young children and you're exhausted, having compliant, quiet, obedient children would be a dream. Until you realise that when that's what you're relying on to parent and deal with every issue when they get to teenage and in their 20s, and you've raised them to not come to you when they're struggling, to not share those big feelings with you, to keep them away and sort of raise them in such a way that they feel that my parents only really want to spend time with me when I'm regulated and I'm calm. I think that's the issue. So for me, I would always focus on time in, which is a naff way of basically saying if a child's really struggling and you have the capacity to do so, then spend some time with them and try and regulate it. For me, the key with all parenting is not about trying to control our children or change what they do. It's about trying to control ourselves and change our triggers and our reactions and the way that we respond to our children. It is a massive change from the classic sort of naughty steps and timeouts. And I think for a lot of parents, they'll be like, oh my gosh, 20 years ago, we could hit our children. Then we had to do timeout and naughty step. And now she's saying we can't do that. You know, everything changes all the time. To which I think my answer would just be, again, don't even listen to me. Go with your gut. Go with your instinct. Does it feel instinctively right to have a child who's very upset and make them sit and face a wall or sit on a step for 3 minutes? Or does it feel more instinctively right to take a breather, remind yourself you're the adult and be calm and just say, okay, let's talk it through, or give them a hug, or even leave the room, take a breather till you've calmed down enough and say, okay, you're struggling. How can we fix this? I think coming back to that instinct is important. There'll always be different trends and experts and phrases and books, but I really do believe we know what to do deep down if we take away all the stuff and the noise.
But as you say, kind of young people at the moment, there's a real sense of crisis about what's happening with young people. This podcast is called the Mummafesto. We apologise profusely for that pun, but it was the best we could do because we are going to face a general election very soon in this country. It's an opportunity to put issues on the agenda. Given the work that you do, how passionately you feel about childism, if there was one thing you would want to see on the agenda for the general election in that Mummafesto, what would it be? Whether it's a policy, a way of thinking, what would you want politicians to be working on with parents and carers in this country? One thing. I'm going to push you for one thing. I won't put you on the...
Gosh. Okay, I would have to say that the one thing is education and our system and the gross underfunding of it, the fact that teachers aren't paid enough, the retention and recruitment issue, and the way that schools have to treat children in the system that they are in because of the chronic underfunding and all of the mess that Ofsted is causing. If I can squeeze one or two more in, I would say that the childcare changes that have been proposed and are coming in are horrendous and are going to cripple the childcare industry, and we have got to get rid of the 2-child limit in universal credit benefits because it's putting way too many families and innocent children into poverty. Sorry.
That's I'll let you get away with 3 and I won't make you sit on that naughty step because I think those are really powerful, important issues. And if someone's listening to this and maybe they're a bit skeptical, but also they're kind of curious, what would be the one thing you would want them to take away? Apart, you say trust your gut, trust your instinct. What can people who are around children do to help improve their opportunities in life in that way, in thinking in these different ways?
So the main thing that I think would change everything is if as adults we understood some basic child development. So we understood how the brain develops and what children are capable of at every age. The way we are towards them would be entirely different because it would change our expectations of them and everything would be more focused and child friendly, from parenting to school to everything else. Those expectations are just, I really wish that we had 2 biology GCSE lessons on child development and brain development. I think it would make an enormous difference. There's so much more, but that's the one thing I'll stick with.
Putting in the Mummafesto is making people do child development.
Yeah, and birth and breastfeeding. Birth, breastfeeding, child development. Make them do 1 or 2 weeks on it. If we get them when they're young, I think it would make a huge difference.
Well, it is a very powerful call for change, and I hope people listening to this are really interested. We will share the details so people can find out more about your work. But thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us today on the Mummafesto. I am off to binge watch Bluey to make myself feel better about the baby race one, where Bingo gets up and starts walking towards the mum is the one that gets me every time. I'm sure everyone listening to this probably does have a favourite Bluey. But I'm also worried we are racing a nation of children who will say biscuits in an Australian accent as a result. Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us today.
Thank you.
The American actor Ray Romano once said that having children is like living in a frat house. Nobody sleeps, everything's broken, and there's a lot of throwing up. Welcome to this week's Mummafesto, the podcast where parenting and politics combine, with me, Stella Creasy, the MP for Walthamstow. My guest this week on the Mummafesto is the well-known parenting expert and childcare author, Sarah Ockwell-Smith. Sarah is considered to be the founder of what's called the gentle parenting movement. She's authored over 15 books on parenting that have sold 500,000 copies around the world, and her latest, How to Raise a Teen, will be out in July this year.